Have you ever wondered what could bring down an army so powerful it once made all of Europe tremble? Not in a single decisive battle, not by a brilliant enemy general, but in a way far slower, far quieter, and far more relentless. Throughout history, there have been armies built on iron discipline, refined strategy, and overwhelming strength, yet some of them collapsed without warning. Their enemy did not stand across the battlefield. It carried no sword, it wore no uniform, and it could not be defeated by courage or force of will. It arrived silently, day after day, wearing them down until strength faded, until order collapsed, until everything finally gave way. So what force was powerful enough to decide the fate of an entire army, and even bend the course of human history itself? At the beginning of the 19th century, all of Europe seemed to move to the rhythm of a single name: Napoleon Bonaparte. He was not merely a brilliant general. He represented a new kind of war, faster, more disciplined, and organized on a scale the world had never seen. In less than 20 years, Napoleon defeated or forced into submission nearly every major European power: Austria, Prussia, Spain. Each campaign ended swiftly, decisively, and with every victory, his reputation grew, unbeatable. His army, the Grand Army, was not only massive in size, it was trained to move quickly, to adapt, to coordinate infantry, cavalry, and artillery as a single force. To allies and enemies alike, it was the most powerful war machine on earth. Yet one great power still refused to fully bow: Russia. Although peace agreements had been signed, Russia grew increasingly hostile to the European order Napoleon imposed. Economic blockades cut deep. Tensions rose. For Napoleon, that defiance could not stand. In the year 1812, he turned his gaze eastward. Russia would be the target of a decisive campaign. In his mind, the pattern was familiar: one overwhelming victory, one final blow, and Russia, like so many before, would submit. Driven by that certainty, Napoleon assembled a force unlike anything Europe had ever seen. More than 600,000 soldiers marched east: French, Polish, German, Italian. Different languages, different cultures, unified by iron discipline and near total faith in Napoleon's military genius. On paper, no army in Europe could rival it, not in size, not in strength, not in coordination. But Russia was not like Napoleon's previous enemies. Its land stretched endlessly outward: vast spaces, sparse populations, roads that barely existed. The distance between major cities alone threatened even the most carefully calculated supply plans. Russian commanders understood this perfectly. They did not need to win a decisive battle. They did not need to defeat Napoleon outright. They only needed time. As French forces advanced, Russian troops withdrew, methodically, deliberately. Villages were abandoned, food supplies burned, crops destroyed. Everything that once allowed French armies to live off the land in Central Europe disappeared. The Grand Army became dependent on supply lines stretching hundreds, sometimes thousands, of kilometers. Still, Napoleon believed the campaign would end quickly. He had won too many wars through speed and pressure to doubt it now. Too many enemies had surrendered before logistics became a problem. But one factor lay beyond even his control. Russia was not defined only by its people, or its retreating strategy, or its vast geography. It was shaped by something else entirely: a harsh climate, unpredictable seasons, and a winter known for its cruelty. And unlike armies, the weather never fights for the invader. In the summer of the year 1812, as Napoleon Bonaparte's Grand Army crossed the border into Russian territory, the weather gave no warning of what was to come. There was no storm, no sudden catastrophe, only a quiet test. That never stopped. Under the summer sun, heat pressed down on endless dirt roads. With every step, dust rose into the air from soldiers, wagons, and horses moving as far as the eye could see. Then came the rain, not enough to cool the heat, just enough to change everything. The roads turned slick, then soft, then slowly, relentlessly, into mud. An army used to the solid roads of Central Europe was dragged into a crawl. Every delay shattered supply schedules that had been calculated down to the day. Almost immediately, the system began to break. Thousands of horses, the backbone of transport and artillery, collapsed from exhaustion, hunger, and disease. When horses fell, wagons stopped, cannons were abandoned, food never reached the front, rations shrank, hunger spread. Soldiers survived on whatever remained in villages that Russian forces had already emptied or destroyed. Disease followed close behind. Fever, dysentery. Men died without ever seeing a major battle. And still, this was only the beginning. When Napoleon finally entered Moscow, after brutal fighting, he believed the campaign was nearly over. But the city did not surrender. It was empty, silent. Soon, it was burning. There were no diplomats, no peace offers. Napoleon waited in a ruined capital while each passing day drained the strength of his army. Then, autumn arrived, early and colder than expected. And almost without warning, it became winter. Temperatures fell beyond anything French soldiers had ever known. -10 degrees, then -20. In some places, even lower. The Grand Army was not prepared. Winter coats were scarce. Many soldiers wore only thin uniforms, torn apart by months of marching. Boots disintegrated, feet froze, weapons locked solid. Gunpowder became damp and useless. Firearms turned into dead weight. Horses continued to die. From cold, from hunger, forcing the army to abandon artillery, supply wagons, and wounded men who could no longer move. The cold did not only destroy bodies, it crushed morale. Men sat down by the roadside to rest and never stood up again. Wounded soldiers left outdoors for only a few hours froze to death. The retreat became a corridor of death, where snow, hunger, and disease killed more men than Russian forces ever did. Units dissolved, discipline collapsed, orders no longer mattered, only survival. When the Grand Army was finally forced into full retreat, the weather had become its most ruthless enemy. Blizzards erased the horizon. Plunging temperatures meant even a single mistake could cost a life. And when the last remnants staggered out of Russian territory, the truth was undeniable. An army that had once numbered more than 600,000 had been reduced to a shattered fraction. The rest were gone, not defeated by enemy blades, but erased by the Russian winter. An enemy without uniform, without strategy, yet powerful enough to destroy the strongest army in Europe. The Russian campaign of the year 1812 reveals a brutal truth. In war, humans are never in full control. Napoleon did not fail because he lost his brilliance. He failed because he underestimated forces that exist beyond human will. Weather, climate, geography. They require no strategy. They command no armies. Yet they can destroy even the most powerful forces ever assembled. The lesson of Russia is not meant only for generals. It reminds us that strength, no matter how great, becomes fragile the moment respect for the surrounding world is lost. A plan that looks perfect on paper can collapse because winter arrives too early, because rain lasts too long, because the cold strikes harder than expected. More importantly, this story changes how we understand history itself. War is not decided only by genius, nor only by mistakes. It is shaped by invisible forces that exist alongside humanity at all times. In many moments, the weather becomes the supreme commander. It does not favor the strong. It does not choose sides. It simply punishes those who dare to ignore it. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: in history, as in life, the strongest does not always win. Sometimes the fate of an entire army is decided by something humans cannot command, cannot bribe, and cannot defeat: nature itself.